4, 3, 2, 1. We are live, I think, on Facebook. Say hello, everyone. How's it going?
Hello.
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 Hey.
Everyone good? Everyone having a good time?
Yes.
I've got a new panel this evening, H3O, and I'm so excited to introduce them all to you. Let's go clockwise. So if we go to my right, say your name and where you're tuning in from, and then we'll have a bit of fun and we'll begin our evening of fun.
Who's
That's
to your
you,
right?
Suze.
Yeah, okay. I'm on the left-hand side of my screen.
Oh, it's all in a different order.
Yeah.
That's you. Yeah, you go for it. Yeah.
All right. So I'm Sue Williams. I'm sitting here in the study at my house.
Wonderful. And I was saying earlier, you look quite intelligent. You got some really good books there. Like, what's the vibe there? Like, what are they all about?
Well, I can't take any credit for any of it other than when I finished my book, I need a new one. Greg's like, here's one, pull it off the shelves. Like, I'm surrounded by books. I don't think I can turn this around without making a mess. Hold on. So, like, I'm surrounded by books and work
Wonderful. It's good. It looks very studious. And then if we go down from you to David, tell us about yourself, where you're tuning in from.
Hello, my name's David. I'm tuning in from DUI, so Oaks Ave, just near the church, so not too far from the beach. Yeah,
nice. And just if you're tuning in online, we're live on Facebook. This is H3O Sunday Gathering. Why don't you comment below? We'd love to hear from you and let us know you're watching. If you're tuning in from anywhere in Australia or around the world, why don't you just comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. And then last, but by no means least, we have the chappie in the corner, who is supposed to be here. He's not just some random guy we found. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm John, and I'm also sitting in my study in Fairlight that I've just tidied with a nice plant to make it look better than it usually does.
Ready for Palm Sunday, right?
Oh yeah, yes, on board.
Nice work.
I think it's a fig tree.
Good.
We can pretend it's a palm.
Yeah, it'll do.
Yeah, it's great. Well, today is Palm Sunday. How tonight's going to work is we're going to have a mini interview talk in a little while from David. Then we're going to hear a little bit about St. Benedict, one of my favourite saints, and we'll be telling you about him later and thinking about developing a rule of life. Then we're going to have a mini interview with Suze, who's going to tell us about an amazing activity that she's been doing over the last week and going to encourage us to do the same. And then we're going to finish. And tonight we're going to behave ourselves and not overrun. So good luck. Let's see how we go. But we always like to start with a bit of fun and with this at home. But basically, last week, it came to my attention that Jan, who is an employee of H3O Church and a wonderful person, but and since I've known Jan, I've not really found anything, a problem or anything to be wrong with her, except for this one thing. Jan does not know what a Tim Tam Slam is. Now, I'm English, in case you hadn't worked out, and I knew what a Tim Tam Slam was, but Jan did not know what that was. Guys, you knew what that was, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I've
if
taught
you live in
Americans
England, like the top 5.
I've spent time at summer camp teaching Americans how to do Tim Tam Slams.
Have you got any other camp stories for us? No, I'm joking. Let's leave that. Yeah, so if you're English and you're thinking about Australian things, like the top 5 would be like they're upside down because you're on the other side of the world, which on arrival I realised isn't true. The second one is Crocodile Dundee, like Australia's famous for. The third one is Steve Owen, God rest his soul. Wonderful man. Number 4 is Neighbours. I've been to the Neighbours set and there was only English people there when we visited about 15 years ago. And number 5 is Tim Tam Slams. So what I've encouraged my panel to do is to get some Tim Tams. So can you just show your Tim Tam if you're on the panel? And if you've got Tim Tams at home,
I had to hide the packet from my family, so
particularly if your name's Jan. Yeah, great.
That's a Manuka honey
Well,
one,
I
so
ate some already,
anybody
Sue,
feeling
so
first?
Manuka honey, nice. Australia, Mark Freeman was saying the other day makes very good honey, the best bees in the world, purest bees apparently.
Israel,
And John, what have you got
New Zealand.
there? Could you just show us?
Just regular Tim Tams.
I had to hide my packet so I'd be sure that I'd still have some. So I've got a brand new packet.
I was trying to get my presentation
Regular.
plating.
Nice.
So what I've got here is a cup of, not Milo, but it's good enough. And John, what are you going to dip yours in?
I've got options, but I was going to go with the milk, I think, for the Tim Tam.
You'll struggle to get your
Yeah.
Tim Tam into the other one.
That's true.
Right, okay. So because we've all got them, we're going to have a Tim Tam slam off. We're going to start with semi-finals and a final. So the first one's going to be, we'll keep it international. So we'll go, hey, that joke never dies. No, we'll go John against David first, and I'll go up against Suze. Okay, so what you got?
How do you win?
Slam your Tim Tam and then put it in your mouth full, and it's the last one with an empty. I'm just explaining that. It's the last one with an empty mouth. So bite. How do you do it? Do you do corners or edges? I do corners.
I do corners.
You ready,
okay,
boys?
so you got to down your Tim Tam first. All right, we're on.
Well, wait, Suze. Me and you are going in a minute. We're just going to
Okay.
watch these two first. On your marks, get set, go. This is the first ever live Tim Tam slam. Yeah, if you're tuning in from around the world, it will get better, I promise. John is, something's happening there. Could you open your mouth
Oh,
at the end?
David's well done. All gone.
The internet's struggling a bit today. Let me see if I can speed it up a bit. So, who won?
David won that one hands down.
Right, Suze, it's me and you. Let's do it.
Okay.
John Kavanagh, you're the judge
All right,
in a non-judgmental way.
take your marks.
Oh, you
Get
started,
there.
won't it?
Yeah.
Go. It sounds great.
It's done. In the words of Jesus, it is finished.
I feel like
That
it was a
might be
dead heat.
blasphemy. Okay, we're going to go for Suze versus David in the final.
Oh, okay. I gotta get in. My tea's too far down my cup.
Well, you're breaking up a bit there. Is Suze breaking up for people? Can you just confirm that? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we got you. Okay. On your marks. Get set. Go. The problem for me is that David's just frozen.
Suze,
Suze,
smashed it.
nailed it. Wonderful. Joining, we have the world, we're going to say world champion because you've got like England, Tasmania and New Zealand represented. So Suze, are you from Sydney originally?
I'm actually born in Cairns but raised here.
Oh yeah, that'll do. So Sydney or north of Tasmania wins. Round of applause. Lots of love on Facebook, please. I'm not sure that worked, but I enjoyed my Tim Tam. So Suze, we're going to see you later, and you're going to take us through an activity. But so if you just mute your video now and turn it off, and we'll see you a bit later on.
Okie doke.
If you've just joined us, yeah, lovely to see you. Give her a wave, everyone. Ciao, ciao. Yeah, thanks so much. I'm so glad you came on to Slam. So those who've just joined us, it's Palm Sunday today. We're live on Facebook. For better or worse, anything could happen. But what we wanted to do today was kind of divide the evening into 3 sections and also stick to our time limit and try and finish by 9 o'clock-ish tonight. We'd love for you to comment. We'd love for you to ask questions as you go, or just make comments about your husband and how funny he is. I think your wife's just making comments on you currently, John. But what we'd planned for tonight before COVID-19 came along was 3 talk Sunday. So we're going to have 3 5-minute talks. And David was going to do one of those talks. And his theme was the Palm Sunday reading. So I was going to get Suze to do the reading, but I've just told her to go. Suze, why don't you come back and do the reading if you're there?
I can do that.
And the reading is from, oh, that was so quick. I knew it. I knew you'd be there. So take it away. This is the Bible reading for today.
So this is Matthew 21, 1-10. Jesus comes to Jerusalem as king. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. "Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds went ahead of him, and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, "Who is this?"
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Suze. Now you can go. Wow, she's good. She's very smooth. So, David, we were going to have you like up at church on a Sunday and speak on this stuff, but we just felt that like doing a talk to the camera can be a little bit dry. So we thought me and John would kind of interview you, and then I say interview, I'm going to ask the questions, and then John's going to throw in a few pearls of wisdom on the side. But yeah, it's great to hear from you. And before we start, I noticed you've got like even no ears, or you've got one of those backgrounds on that you put on Zoom. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because I think you've done it especially for today.
Yeah, so I'm channeling my inner TV correspondent, which is what I wanted to be when I was little. So I've got my little picture here, and I'll tell the story as we go on in the interview.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I might try that next week. Why don't you all just suggest what could be my background? That would be great. So, David, the first question really is, like you've been doing a bit of like thinking about this story. Like, just share a little bit about why did you pick this passage?
So I come from a Presbyterian background. So when we preach according to what the readings are for the week. So it's something I've preached on before in my previous church on Palm Sunday. It was always a big thing for our church. We had this donkey that was made of sackcloth and hay that we kind of put on the stage, and it had a direction pointing to Jerusalem. So it was part of our kind of our yearly format. I guess to make Palm Sunday one of those Sundays that kind of stuck out for us as a church.
Yeah, it's great. I remember being at a more traditional church in England, and like you say, we used to parade out into the square, and the priest, like we'd wear something called a cope, which is like a bonus dress, and then carry massive palms. I'll put a photo up later. You can probably find it on Facebook. But it was actually something to look forward to, and people from the town came out and thought, "What are they doing?" But it was a really good opportunity to have a conversation about that. So why don't you begin, as we think about this passage, like you might do with a sermon, by telling us the story?
Cool. So I guess the most interesting part of the story for me is that smack in the middle of it, we have this kind of throwback to an Old Testament prophecy. So the book of Matthew is written for Greek-speaking Jewish Christians who were living in Antioch, or what we now call Syria. And so those Jewish Christians would have known about this prophecy, and it would have been really important for them to make the link. So if we skip back to Zechariah 9:9, it says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So that prophecy was made by the prophet Zechariah about 520 years before the time of Jesus. So that's after the Babylonians had conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, and the Jews were taken into captivity or fled to safe places around the area. And after the Babylonians, it was the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Hasmoneans, and then finally the Romans. And the Romans were particularly cruel, and it was a quite devastating time for the Jewish people. So what strikes me about this is, in all this time, they held on to this hope that a Messiah would come who was descended from the great King David. And they believed this Messiah would bring leadership that they needed desperately to liberate them from the Romans. So with Palm Sunday, Jesus fulfills this prophecy and enters Jerusalem the way it was prophesied that would happen, as Matthew points out. Another interesting part of the story is that he chooses to do this during Passover. So if we dive a bit more deeper into it, so Passover was a time which marked the Jewish people were getting liberated from slavery in Egypt. And as a nation, they received their freedom under the leadership of Moses. So this festival of Passover celebrates that. And it's the anniversary of a time that they had hope for this leader, and that was realized, I guess, with Moses. So around this time of Passover was a time when Jewish people were particularly high hoped, like on a scale to 10, it's like at 9.9, I would say. And in today's context, it's like when you watch the whole footy season and you're waiting for footy season final time, and your hope is there
for the Champions League final
or the FA Cup final, or even for Christmas for children, like they've held on to that hope all year that they're going to get that Christmas gift. So, like,
do you mind if I just jump in there, because
I guess.
I know even like people have heard me say this before, like the geography of Jerusalem kind of builds that tension as well, because we know that Jerusalem's kind of like elevated, it's on a hill, and Jesus was coming from Jericho. So as he came up that way, like there would have been a big cloud of dust as Jesus and his disciples came towards him. So the drama would have built and built. John, did you want to throw anything in at this point? Because I know like you're something of a genius.
I'll lean in just to say no. I'm doing fine. Preach, David.
Yeah. So I do. What do you think? What do you think the main point of this? I hesitate to say story. This narrative, this like telling of Jesus' life is.
Yeah. So we have these two symbols, I guess, that we just might touch on just quickly. So we've got the donkey and the palm branches. So I think when I first read it, I thought Jesus was being real humble by choosing to come in on a donkey instead of a horse. But I guess when we study a bit deeper, we see that riding in on a donkey or mule was like seen as an emblem of peace, whereas coming on a horse would have been an emblem of war, I guess. And so when we look at the Old Testament, we see that Solomon, when he was inaugurated as a king, actually entered in on a mule. So that's one of the things that we should probably clear up. And also, so we shouldn't read into the fact that this was a sign of poverty or degradation for Jesus, but it was more the appropriate way in which a king should ride at that time. And the palm branches themselves, they symbolize goodness, well-being, and victory. They were often depicted on coins at the time, or put on important buildings. So the cutting of branches from palm trees and laying them in the path of Jesus or waving them in the air was a greeting fit for a political leader who had come to overthrow the Romans. So this is fully what the Jews had hoped for, and that's what they were expecting, and this is where we have this messianic hope. So I guess the main point for me in the scripture is really around that theme of hope, and it also gives us a lens of how we view the rest of the Holy Week. The road to Jesus is all about, the road to the crucifixion is all about the Pharisees, the high priests, King Herod, Pontius Pilate, and all having to decide whether Jesus was the Messiah or not, I guess. And Jewish people had been hoping all this time that he was. The Jewish people held this hope for centuries. So this is why we see them rejoice and we see them singing Hosanna to the Son of David, Hosanna in the highest heaven.
Yeah.
So for me, the story is like the people were lying down the palm branches or coats. As they were doing that, they were like taking a sigh of relief and breathing out, I guess, and things are about to change. All our hopes have come true, and we know that doesn't actually eventuate, I guess.
Yeah, it's really good. And can I just jump in there, because I think there's a really interesting kind of moment, like you mentioned the donkey. I've got a really difficult question for John, which I haven't pre-warned him about, and I'm going to ask him at the end. But there's a difference between Jesus coming in on a donkey and on a white horse. So like 100 years before Judas Maccabees had arrived in Jerusalem, like with a sword on a white horse. And so the Israelites knew those stories that had been passed down, and the expectation was that Jesus was coming to overthrow the empire. Now, in some ways he does, but not in the way they expected him to, and that's kind of an interesting moment. John, you sound like you're good to go as well. Tell us something.
Were you going to ask me a question, or were you going to leave it to the end? What did you say?
Okay, my question to you is, right, in one of the gospel accounts, this is off the top of my head, there's one donkey, and in one of the other gospel accounts there's two. There's like a mum and a child one. Like, why is that? Like, because that seems kind of inconsistent in terms of the narrative arc of the story.
I'm not 100% sure, but I did notice one thing.
Got two.
Yeah, I did notice before when Suze was doing the reading. Like, I think some versions say mounted on when quoting Zechariah, say on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey, and then some versions, translations just translate that as on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So there's potentially like a translation thing going on, whether it's an and or just a further description. Yeah. But you're right, yeah. In Matthew, he comes in on a donkey and a colt, but in the book of Mark, he just comes in on the colt. And I was reading about this today, right? Because I was trying to figure out how do you ride two horses without doing like a Jean-Claude Van Damme split situation between the two of them. But apparently it's just pretty normal use of language, right? If you've got a donkey and its child walking beside it, you just talk about them as a single like object rather than as two animals, apparently.
Yeah.
That'd be my guess. A translation.
I like that reading a bit, because I was reading something like N.T. Wright wrote, and he said that like it's kind of up for debate. So some people think there's symbolism in the kind of like mother donkey and then the colt donkey, which is possible, particularly because Matthew's writing potentially to a Jewish audience, and I think it's Mark where it's a young colt, and he's writing to a different audience. So it's possible, but I think your reading's probably slightly more likely. That can be the danger of overanalyzing symbolism. So David,
and I think that
what does this mean for us today? Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, John. Yeah.
I was just going to throw back to David too and just say I think that the biggest bit of symbolism is the difference between the like a warlike and a peace-like stance.
Yeah. And can I just say, if you're tuned in online, any questions you've got for us or you'd like for us to discuss, just throw them in. Any comments or observations? We'll do a bit of feedback in a moment. But David, what does this mean for us today?
So I think for those of you who tuned in the 4 p.m. service or know Dan's children's storytelling style quite well, there's always this question of where do you see yourself in the story, or what can you bring back to the story? I think that's a good way to end, I guess. I think in our situation today, I think for a lot of us, conversation around the home or our internal dialogue is hope in relation to the coronavirus coming to an end. So all of us are hoping that ourselves or people we love don't get the virus. Some of us are hoping that we can celebrate children's birthdays. Some of us are hoping that we don't lose our jobs or we can get back to our jobs pretty fast. So for me personally at this time, it's about channeling that hope that the Jewish people had for all those centuries to my current day circumstances. Sometimes just focusing on what it looked like for them and their oppression, those 500 years, and coming back, and there are still 500 years later, they still held on to those hopes. They still held on to those prophecies, I guess. So I think
So good, mate.
a lot of my reflection this week
So
has just
good.
been focused on that hope there.
Well, we'd love to hear from you. Like, if you're tuning in, like, what does this mean? What does this story mean for you this week at this time? And I'm so glad that you said that, David. It's about hope. And you see, for the people that were waiting for Jesus to come and overthrow the empire, which he did do, but in a different way, that would have seen hope. That would have been seemingly hopeless, seemingly impossible to do. The Romans, the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. And Jesus did it, but he did it in a different way. And it kind of builds on our conversation from last week. Like, what's the gift? What's the opportunity in the disruption? What is going on at this time as we hope for this to stop? And so we both pray for healing, we pray for restoration, but also look for the gift in this time. So have we got any questions? I'm just having a little look. Yeah, Renee said, I love that, Renee. Hope is a lost art, I think. A couple of people have liked that. Perhaps we've forgotten how to hope. Do others agree with that? Not really a question, but I like the idea of a war stance, perhaps fueled by the fear in these unstable times versus peacemaking approach to life and the lives around us. Yeah, thanks for that, Lauren. What would it look like to be passively, positively aggressive at this time? Yeah, this is a really good question. I want to ask John this one from Renee. What do you think was going through Christ's mind at the moment he arrived on the donkey?
So, the two things I'd say. One is, like, in Matthew's account of this, after Jesus rides in on the donkey, the very next thing he does is go straight to the temple and cleanses the temple, like chases out the traders, and, you know, turns over the tables, sends the animals running, that sort of thing, right? But in Mark's account of this, Jesus comes in this triumphant sort of people singing, palm branches, and then the way Mark presents it is he gets there, he looks around, and then he leaves. There's like this pause. So there's this massive build-up, and you got to imagine that Jesus was feeling that, right? But he knows why he's going to Jerusalem. No one else really gets it. So for him, I think there would have been this massive sense of expectation, but the sort of expectation that has a lot of suffering on the other end of it. And I think for me, it's that moment in Mark's gospel where he sort of gets there and he stands, where I think you see a man sort of just stopping and taking in everything that's about to happen over the next week leading up to his crucifixion on Friday. So I think Jesus would have been in a fair bit of emotional turmoil, and he would have known that what he was doing was great. He would have been aware of this symbolism in this passage, but he also would have known that it's leading to a very different place to what people think it is, and it's leading to a very difficult and painful place for him. So yeah, it's hard. I can't relate to that. I have not been in a situation like that with such extreme emotions, but I think Jesus would have been, torn between the sort of the fanfare of this and the realization of what was coming. That'd be my guess, psychoanalyzing.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. David, feel free to add anything to that.
I don't know, it's hard to put yourself in Jesus' shoes. I think someone told a story once. They were a child and their favorite Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle was Donatello. They waited all year for Christmas to get that Donatello, but their parents had gone to the shop and that only Raphael was left, or one of the other ones, and that's what he got in the Christmas present instead. And so the Jewish people, he would have known that they're rejoicing for something that he actually wasn't going to provide. So he's kind of, yes, I am the king, but not the way you want it. It's not your real thing in your head, I guess. So knowing all that and then seeing these people like, oh yeah, I am kind of, but not really. I guess that's all that's all I kind of think he had to contemplate at the time. Yeah.
Jed has added to that on the same sort of trajectory. If you want to know what the donkey was thinking, check this out. So there's a great poem. If you want to paste it into the comments, we might even read that if it's appropriate. I think I know the one, but why don't you just paste that in, Jed, just below. Yeah, and Kerry's just added in. It's really good. Like John's point shows us the humanity of Jesus, and I think that's the interesting thing about it. That like as Jesus comes in, the whole crowd like really excited, really buzzing. There would have been a bit of him in his humanity, not that that's separate from his godness, but in his humanity that would have loved the crowd, that would have loved the adulation, and yet at the back of his head, like David said, he would have known what was going to happen. He would have known that actually in 7 days he was going to rise again, but in 5 days he'd been nailed to a cross to take on the greatest punishment known to man, like by the greatest empire that had ever lived, the cruelest death by crucifixion. And so he's got this kind of like paradox going on in his head really as he arrives. But I think the thing that strikes me is his humility, and then almost how calculated he is, because whichever account you read, whether it's Mark where he kind of disappears, so he goes in as this really dramatic moment and then disappears, or he goes back to Bethany, right? Is that right, John? Yeah, he heads back.
He does for that night, yeah.
Or in Matthew's account when he goes into the temple. I remember chatting to someone much cleverer than me, and they were telling me about Jesus's anger in that next story. When Jesus goes into the temple, he sees them like dealing the money and gets like really annoyed that this is happening in the temple in the Holy of Holies. And then there's this little line in the scriptures that says he made a cat of 9 tails whip and then went back in and turned over the tables. So it's not like Jesus walks in and sees all these people trading and then just starts throwing over the tables. And you'll get a lot of people like, if you went to Sunday school, go, oh, it's right to be angry because Jesus threw over the tables. No, Jesus' anger is incredibly calculated. It's incredibly dramatic. He's in many ways a showman. Like he's making a point to go away and make a cat 9 tails whip. That isn't something you just knock up in like a couple of moments in a moment of anger. It was calculated. And so he goes back into the temple, and there's so much symbolism as he does that, because we know that a few days later he's beaten with that same whip as he goes to his death, as he goes to crucifixion. So there's so much going on here, depending on which version you read, and it's good as you'll notice in our reflections this week as we journey towards the cross. We've got reflections for the whole family, which will be sent out in the morning, and reflections for adults, which are in the same bit. And we tried to put 2 different accounts in so that you can get different sides of the story, the different moments that were happening as we approach the cross. So we're going to try and do that this week. Have we got any other thoughts from online? Julian says probably the real challenge for Jesus was to enjoy and appreciate the adoration. I'm struggling to get the donkey out without ruining my feed, so we might save that for the end. But if you want to read the poem by G.K. Chesterton that Jed's put up, he's put that in the links. So David, thank you so much. If we could have some like virtual love for David, that would be great on the little emojis at the bottom. Some emoji, round of applause, mate. Thanks for sharing. It's really, really great. And you can leave the meeting now, but if you want to join online, David, and get involved and ask John some more difficult questions, feel free to do that. So thanks, mate. We'll see you soon, hopefully face to face. We need to develop, John, a little saying that we have for people, don't we? Like, see you when we can shake hands, or see you face to face.
Yeah.
Perhaps people from home, watching at home, could come up with something that would be really great. So look, we talked a bit about Palm Sunday. We're going to just, go on. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think I saw a Stephen Colbert bit where he's talking about we're just going to be touching each other's faces when we come out of this. Just desperate to. That's when you'll know it's really over.
John, don't you do that? I normally do that to people anyway. Is that not what you're
Not
supposed
for me
to do?
so much. No, I'm not really a face toucher.
No.
It's not my love language.
You got a nice beard though. It's kind of anyway. We should stop. It's just we are on the internet. It's not just us talking. So if you've just joined us, we've just looked at the Palm Sunday reading, but today we want to talk about in this difficult time as COVID-19 becomes not abnormal but normality. What does it look like for us to develop a new rhythm of life as we're self-isolating or as we're quarantined, as we're pretty much shut in our homes? What does it look like to not only survive at this time, but thrive? Not only survive spiritually, but thrive spiritually. How can we do that? And me and John were chatting a little while ago, and John gave me this great idea of talking a bit about the rule of life. We were going to do that last week, but we ran out of time, so we thought we'd give a few moments to that tonight. So, but before we do that, I suppose if you were trying to name where this idea of a rule came from, you'd probably first look at St. Benedict. So me and John are going to have just a chilled out conversation about Benedict for a few moments, St. Benedict of Nursia. And if you want to ask us any questions or add in any info that you know about St. Benedict, then we'd love to hear from you. But before we start, John, do you want to just share, like, what was your first experience of Benedict? How did you come across him, and like, where did you learn about him?
It wouldn't have been that long ago, I don't think. Probably only like the last 5-6 years. So I grew up in a church where this wasn't sort of part of the tradition at all, and it's only sort of more recently this has become something I've been aware of. And I think partly like Benedict's pretty like zeitgeisty at the moment, pretty popular. There's been a number of like good and bad best-selling books written about the Benedictine way of life, and I think that's sort of put on a lot of people's attention. And I think there's probably a lot of people out there at the moment who've just heard about Benedict in the last couple of years, and sort of gotten into his stuff recently. He's having a moment, or was having a moment, maybe 2 years ago. Maybe a little bit out of fashion again now.
A cultural moment. So yeah, I think that's right. I first heard about him. I mean, I could paint this like to make myself seem like I was really enlightened, but it's not actually true. So when you study theology or like go to Vicar College, they do a module called Spiritualities, where you kind of look at the church fathers and the people throughout church history that have shaped our faith as we know it today. And like I said last week, you know, often some of the challenges we face have been faced before by the church, and actually we're often trying to look forward and come up with a new thing. But if we look back, they probably dealt with similar issues in the past, and that's definitely the case when we think about COVID-19. But Benedict, basically, I did this spiritualities module, and Alex had studied theology, like done a certificate a year before me at the same college, and so I had to write an essay on one of the church fathers. And there were two reasons I picked St. Benedict. One, because we had lots. One, because we had lots of books, and two, because Alex had already written an essay on him. And so I did my best not to copy it. My degree is legit, just to be clear. I'm not confessing plagiarism. Jed, I know you're a university lecturer. If you've ever copied someone's essay or you've got a story about that, please comment below and we can do an absolution at the end. But basically, we had loads of books on him, and it saved me going to the library, so I wrote my essay on Benedict. But fortunately, and then when I studied again, we had a similar module, just a bit more advanced, like then used a similar structure in the essay. Anyway, it's all good. I will get a legit degree one day. So, but as I read him, as I read Benedict, I just found him to be a fascinating guy. And what I loved about him was he was both like someone that like super holy in a sense, like if you were thinking about holiness, like set apart for God, and also just like a normal, ordinary guy. And he almost accidentally starts this movement of monasteries like all across Europe and influenced the whole world. And I love that. So yeah, I mean, John, do you want to start? Tell us a few things about Benedict.
Well, I think maybe something to jump off on there is that it kind of did happen by accident. So he was just a guy, and he quickly found out that he couldn't hack life in the city. I think he'd moved to Rome, and just the culture and the big city and everything he saw there was like an affront to him. So he basically just disappeared off into the hills and became a hermit. And then sort of over time, different communities started to form around him, and he came up with this rule in bits and pieces. And I think one of the things you're saying there where it happened by accident, it also wasn't very popular to start off with. So there's lots of stories about his fellow monks trying to poison him and things like that, just to get this annoying guy setting all these new rules out of the way. So it's kind of nice that he's having a moment. He's had plenty since, but at the beginning it was a bit rough for him. But the truth is we don't know
that story, John. Just to jump in, the one about the poison, because I do think it's worth dwelling on. It's really great. He basically there was this monastery, and they'd kind of got rid of their abbot. Like the abbot's kind of like the CEO of the monastery, in kind of layman's terms, and then they basically begged Benedict to be their new abbot, but he was so harsh that they decided to also try and poison him. So they gave him this kind of wine that was poisoned, and as Benedict blessed it, the glass shattered. And people cite this as one of the miracles that God performed through him. I just think it's an amazing story. They were trying to poison him and did it. Anyway, sorry, you carry on.
I was just going to say, so it obviously didn't start that well for him. It didn't take off. His monastery didn't like him, but he's known now as the father of Western monasticism. So people have been following the rule of Saint Benedict now for 1,500 years, which is amazing when you think about it. And I was just seeing on the news just this week an article about some Trappist monks in America following the rule of Saint Benedict, and they got in the news because of their response to the coronavirus in America. So there's still people alive today that are sort of strictly following the rule of Saint Benedict 1,500 years later.
There's so much good stuff in there, and we'll get to his rule in a few moments, and I'd love to just look at one of the chapters I liked. But before we get to that, just one other story about him. He was just like a regular guy like you and me, and that's why I like him. You can relate to him. I can't speak for you, John, but there's this story about him. As John said, he left Rome. He kind of left university, and John knows what's coming. He's basically sitting in his cave, and all of a sudden he became he was overcome with lust, and he brought to mind this woman that he fancied when he was at university, and he decided he was going to give up his life as a hermit, give up all the kind of monasticism stuff, and go to Rome and find this woman. And so that he didn't become overcome with lust, this is what he did to stop him from doing that, and probably incidentally saved the church in Western Europe. He basically to stop him being overcome with lust, he took off his cloak, got completely naked, and jumped into this thorn bush and lacerated himself until he didn't feel lustful anymore. Now, this is extreme. I'm not suggesting you do this, and I'm not making any comments about lust, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But in that culture at that time, I can relate to that. I can relate to that story. I think it's so helpful, and it just paints a picture of this wonderful man that kind of accidentally changed the world. So yeah. So his rule, John, just tell us roughly about what this rule of life was, and then we'll talk a bit more about our rule of life in a few moments.
So the rule of Saint Benedict is this, I think, is it 73 chapters? Is that right? 73, 78, 73 rules, something like that.
Yeah.
But they're all real short, right? So they're only a couple of paragraphs each. So the whole thing's probably only 30 pages long. So you can read the whole rule beginning to end pretty easy. That book looks thicker than 30 pages.
73 is a commentary. Yeah, 73.
That's why it's longer. Because you can 30 pages or so is how long it is. And it's basically a way of life. So it takes into account every moment, waking and sleeping, of the life of a monastery, and parts of it are focused on the individual, parts of it are focused on the community, and it's sort of it actually is a rule for every bit of life, from waking up, preparing food, eating food, work, prayer, and everything in between. So he covers every sort of what minute of the monk's life across these 73 chapters, these 73 rules. And some of them you read and you go, oh, that's really clever. And then some of them you read and go, I could not do that one.
Yeah. Do you have particular favorites or bits that
I do have one. There's one I like. I think this is something that I probably wouldn't try, but I think we all kind of do a version of it anyway. Like, do you watch TV when you eat dinner, or do you sit around the table?
Yes.
Which one?
Both.
Both. Yeah. So we probably do both too. We probably sit and watch TV when we eat dinner more often than we'd like to admit. But one of Benedict's rules is he demands complete silence during dinner time, but there's one person who reads during dinner. So it's kind of like having dinner in front of the TV, except for you have to be quiet and there's one person who's reading something. I think sometimes it's okay for them to sing as well. And so everyone sits together, eats their meal and listens to a reading. So he's sort of making sure you don't waste any bit of your day. But there's something about that appeals to me. I think it'd be super awkward to do it with your family to that extent, make everyone be silent and monologue through all of dinner. But just that idea of like reading out loud to friends, family, I think, yeah, that seems doable. And I kind of like the idea.
We did it once at Vicar College. We did it, and
how'd that go?
I remember, like, we were in this. It was random. We used to go for this week retreat to this old monastery. I think it was Benedictine actually. Maybe not in France. It was an amazing place. Like, the food was really strange and it was freezing cold, but it was great. Like, we loved it. And our principal, amazing guy, he's bishop now. Like, read through one of the Psalms off the back of this. But my mate John Finch, who leads a massive church now in Southampton, one of the HTB churches, so he's a naughty boy, was like catching my eye the whole time and trying to make me laugh. And when I eventually turned around and like avoided that, because it's really hard to do, right? We're just not used to it. I found, like, in that kind of silence of eating together and with the Psalms going in the background, that you're actually more aware of other people as you do that stuff. So, like, you know, if someone wants you to pass the salt or the pepper, which you often did because the food was so bad at this place, just to like water it down, like you'd be aware of their movements and you could kind of tell, like, oh yeah, John wants something now, like I'll give it to him. Yeah, it's a really good thing to do, something that's worth practicing. Yeah, really helpful stuff. One thing for me that jumped out from the rule, I printed it out, is chapter 7 talks about humility. And when we think about the Palm Sunday readings, a lot of people say, like, the humble king comes into Jerusalem. And chapter 7 is all about humility. He divides humility into 12 degrees or steps of the ladder which lead to heaven. Number 1, fear God. Number 2, subordinate one's will to the will of God. Number 3, be obedient to one's superior. Number 4, be patient in hardships. Number 5, confess one's sin. Number 6, this is a good one, accept the meanest of tasks and hold oneself as worthless workmen. Number 7, consider oneself inferior to all. That's what we see in Jesus, right? Number 8, follow examples set by superiors. Number 9, do not speak until spoken to. I could do with learning that one. Number 10, do not readily laugh. I just confessed that.
Oh no.
John, you just did it too. Number 11, speak simply and modestly. And 12, express one's inward humility through bodily posture. I just think that's just really helpful stuff. Perhaps someone could paste them below as well. I'd love to. We're going to in a few moments.
I was just going to say, I feel like we've made it sound really intense.
It is, and here's the thing: like, lived out that book, like you said, it is intense, but like, if you find your own way in it, like, I don't know, I think it leads to life. I really do. I think some of that stuff's helpful. It's not about legalism.
And I think for most
I'm just trying to see what we've got from people, perhaps you could pin some questions.
I think for most people, it's like not everyone follows the strict full rule of Saint Benedict, but a lot of people take the theory and build their own practices around it, and that's sort of one of the key things I think to keep in mind. No one's expecting you to go get a copy of the rule and like do all 73 every single day or anything, but there is something about that sort of degree of intentionality that I think is helpful, particularly at a time like this. Yeah.
I think so, and we'll jump onto that in a minute. I think we've got a couple of books just to recommend. So this is Esther Duval, who's really great on Benedict, and she wrote a book called Seeking God: The Way of St. Benedict. It's a really tiny book. I'm sure there's a newer version now. Another one by Joan Chichester, which is like a commentary on Benedict's rules. So like if you get a commentary, that's really helpful. It's worth a read. And let's go with Eric Dean, Saint Benedict for the Laity, if you want to try that one out as well. It's worth a look. So yeah, there's some books that you can kind of peruse at your leisure. But today we want to talk about developing a rule of life, and this is something I've got asked to do recently that we've been required to do as I've studied and prepared for ministry over quite a long time now. But we're not suggesting writing a 72 chapter rule of life today, but John, just tell us a little bit about the idea of us looking at this rule of life, and then I'll get out the one that you found, which I thought was really helpful.
Well, I think, so when we were talking about this in the lead up, we sort of both were honest about the fact that it's not something that either of us are particularly naturally good at, right? That sort of disciplined, routine lifestyle, yeah? And I don't, like, what's the longest you've pulled off a rule of life, Dan? Like, how long do you reckon you've nailed one?
Well, not long.
Yeah.
For me, it's like daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. But like, I might do some elements, but I've probably never nailed all of it. No, but you know,
I think I end up having a lot of rest.
Maybe
days,
not from you, but from God.
I think one of the things that has been helpful in my thinking, though, is whether you're intentional about it or not, everyone's got a rule of life, right? There's a particular way that you go about your day, and it might not be consistent. It might change with different days of the week. We all have our routines and our patterns. You know, we start every morning with a cup of coffee. We waste 30 minutes on Facebook when we get home from work, whatever it is. We've got these routines built in. And I think something like a rule of life is good because it's just trying to bring some intentionality into that. And I think probably the first step of trying to develop one for yourself is to be aware of the rules that you already have in place, the habits you already have in place, the rhythms you already have in place, the routines you already have in place. Because for me, I think the hardest thing of like trying to do a rule of life is not starting the new things, it's stopping the things I'm already doing. And particularly because if I'm not aware of them, they're sort of unthought through habits that I keep ticking into, which means we're in a pretty unique space at the moment. And it's why we thought this would be worthwhile doing. Is a lot of us have had our routine just totally destroyed over the last few weeks. We're out of routine, things have been shook up. We're trying to live life a totally different way. And that brings an opportunity to bring some prayerful intentionality into our life, partly just for survival and our own mental health, and partly because it's an opportunity to set up a new pattern that might serve us for years to come, not just through this crisis.
And you found one, which was great. And I think, like, I've just thrown it up on the screen now. I think sometimes in the church, like, we can try and recreate stuff, but actually this church in Portland has done a pretty good job. And obviously you're not going to stick to it, but we might want to base our rule of life.
It's a good example.
This season around this. Do you want to just talk us through it?
Yeah. So I think the way these guys have done
it. This is from a church in Portland.
Yeah, and the way these guys have done it is, I think it's just 10 daily things they put on it, or maybe 9 daily things and 1 weekly thing. So if you scroll down, Dan, you'll see their first suggestion is to start the day in quiet prayer and scripture, and there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. Second, create a gratitude ritual. Again, they're giving you space to how you want to build that into your daily pattern. Like some of us are evening people, some of us are morning people, some of us have kids. We're all going to do this differently. Number 3, good reminder for me, exercise or go for a walk. We are still allowed to do that, so that's good to know. And then 1, focal practice. I like this one because it's asking you to be focused on doing something that brings you life. So whether that's gardening or woodworking or reading or whatever it is, making sure you find time in your day for those sorts of activities as well. Number 5, relational touch points, so having a person or people that you're getting in touch with daily, and again, particularly important at the moment in this time of isolation. We scroll down again. Number 6, limit intake of news. I've heard a lot of people suggesting this is something worthwhile to do at the moment. Like not going back and checking the news every 5 minutes, not constantly scrolling through Facebook or Twitter and reading every news article, but read the news in the morning, read the news again in the evening if you want, but just limit your intake of news. So you're not spending every waking minute reading about COVID-19, thinking about COVID-19, getting someone else's opinion on COVID-19. I think this is something that the church has been a bit guilty of as well. It feels like every pastor has their little 2 cents on COVID-19, and I mean, we're doing it now, so a little bit of hypocrisy there, but yeah. Limiting screen time and escapist behaviours. Number 7, again, I think a lot of us are spending a lot more time in front of screens, so that's good. They're suggesting prayer and fasting on a Tuesday, and I think that's something that they're doing as a community. And this is one of the things about a good rule, and a rule that I think is sustainable, is it's not just about you doing things alone, but you try and build in some things that you're doing as a community. So it might just be your household, it might be a network of friends or a whole church, but there's sort of a mutual accountability and then a mutual building each other up and doing some things together. So that might be something worth chucking up on the Facebook, maybe in the dive in, as you're thinking about.
Can I jump in there, John?
Yeah.
And like with fasting, I feel like as a church, like it'd be worth us looking into that and perhaps even doing one of these sessions around fasting. It isn't always food. It might be like fasting technology or, Alex and me, we managed it for 1.5 weeks. So here's another example of us not being so good at our rule of life, but we tried like leaving our phones plugged in all day so that we didn't go and use it unless we were using it to like arrange to meet someone that day, but not to like just mindlessly scroll through Facebook or whatever it was. But also food, like it's a good practice to fast food, and it's hard to do that. So I'll send out some reading about that as well. There's a really great book which I've scanned a chapter of on fasting. So it's called The Celebration of Discipline, but some good guidance in there. Sorry, John, I interrupted.
No, that's cool. Yeah. That's helpful. And I think, there's different ways you can do this sort of thing. So maybe just a good example of this is back when we did our week of prayer a couple of months back, when we had that, I can't remember if it was midday or 1 p.m. where we were all trying to pray the Lord's Prayer together at the same time. For me, that was helpful because I know other people are doing it, and that means it's ticking in my head that, we're doing this together at this time. And I think, something like fasting is easier to do when you're not doing it by yourself too, when it's a community doing it together or a family doing it together, whatever that looks like you said. Number 9, keeping in touch with an online community. So I know our small groups are doing that, and it's a good thing to do. And then number 10, remembering to keep the Sabbath and online worship, which I guess is what we're doing now. I don't know about you, but this one I think is important for me too, because like over the last couple of weeks, I feel like I never know what day it is. Just days blur into days, and just the pattern of the week is totally thrown out.
Yeah, it's good.
But
I think the Sabbath is so important, and I found like with work and stuff, like at the moment, it's a real challenge because like inevitably we're in a space where it's harder to work a full day, right? Because like you might be looking after your kids or whatever, but then that's meaning that you're like cramming in hours other times, and sometimes like you could be literally working like the whole week, not as efficiently probably, but you're like always ticking away. So I think that switch off, that kind of Sabbath, that time to restore is so important. And I think as a church, not just at HCA, but as a corporate church, we need to learn how to do that. Yeah, it's really good. So we're gonna move on in a few moments. Sorry, John, you go. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, all these are just examples, but I think my one bit of advice would be to not start straight off by going, I'm going to do all these things, but look at what you already do, the patterns you already have in place, be intentional about some of the good things and write them down. And then if you look at some of the things that aren't so good, just think of 1 or 2 practices that might counteract those and just start with a couple. You don't need to try and do 10 all at once. Don't just sit down and write a big list of everything you're going to do. Lean into the things you're already doing and then introduce a few at a time to sort of counteract some of the negative rhythms you're forming. That'd be my sort of advice on how to get going with this.
It's really helpful. And like, basically that's what we want to encourage you to do like this week. Think about developing a rule of life. We'll post some stuff in Dive In, which is our kind of internal group, or on our Facebook page. But if you need some help with this, or you want to talk to someone, give us a ring. We'd love to chat that through. If you had a 5-point rule of life, I think it would really help just developing a rhythm at a time where life just looks completely different. So yeah, thanks, John. That's really, really helpful. Is there any questions just as we finish? Yeah, Kerry, really great challenge. Just a quick comment, RE Technology, we watch this using Facebook on our phone with the Facebook Watch app on Apple TV. Yeah, and that's the thing, like the technology is wonderful, but also it can cause us challenges. So if you want a break, maybe turn off as soon as we've finished. LT Hopper, great name. I assume you're talking about the monastics here. Is number 1 their silence and solitude, or is that expressed differently at another time? John, what do you make of that?
Is that Luann? I think that's Luann. Can you read the question again for me?
Yeah, is number 1 their silence and solitude, or is that expressed differently at another time?
It's interesting. I think one of the common misconceptions about strict Benedictine monks is that they are silent. They're actually not. They just try and avoid flippant talk, but they do build in silence and time alone into their routine. But I mean, some of the stuff we were saying before about St. Benedict made him sound really harsh, like just pretty intense. But the truth is, like, on the full spectrum of monastic life, the Benedictine life is pretty middle way. And I think one of the good things about the rule of St. Benedict is there is a lot of balance. There's a time for this and a time for that. And the whole thing is trying to bring balance into it. So even though, yeah, I think silence and solitude is a big bit of it, it's probably equal to working hard. And a big part of the Benedictine rule is actually being committed to work, and they spend a considerable time of their days working at a trade, or if they're not a lay monk but a priest, in study. But yeah, so there's this balance between silence, prayer, solitude, and working with their hands, working with their minds, and being productive. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
yeah. No, I think that's really helpful. It is about balance. And of course, these people are choosing to give their whole life to prayer, to often move into a monastery. And there are other examples of people that follow the monastic life with like normal everyday jobs. Like there's the whole new monasticism movement, which we can talk about in the coming weeks, if that's helpful. Yeah, cool. I think we'll leave that there. John, thanks so much for your time. If you've got any more questions for John, then he'll jump on Facebook Live after this, but it's great to see you. And Suze, if you want to jump straight back in, because you've got another idea for an activity for this week. Thanks, John, you're the best. Look at that, you're so good, Suze, just straight in. You don't mess about, do you?
Oh, sometimes I master the technology, sometimes it masters me.
We're gonna get straight into it. I was having a conversation with one of your friends, Amy, and she told me about this great activity that you developed for people during this time of isolation and solitude, which I thought was really great. So your friend stitched you up, and I rang you up and said, I'd love for you to go live on the internet to talk about it, if that's okay. But do you want to just get straight in and tell us what you've been doing? Because I think it's creative and I think it's really exciting.
Sure. So I still meet with my small group, my DNA group from Small Boat Big Sea, and we were just really looking for ways that we could maintain our focus on Jesus amongst all the hoopla and hoo-ha and everything else that was going around. And even before, I think we'd all had a really tough time for the first part of the term for different reasons, and within that we were just seeking ways to keep our focus on Jesus. And so last week I what did he call it, church bombed? Yeah, I church bombed on All Saints and just listened to David Ray's sermon. I grew up, as many of you guys know, listening to David Ray, and it was like putting on some comfort socks in a difficult time. And he ended with a blessing, which I haven't actually got in front of me. Do you have that to share on the screen by chance? It doesn't actually matter.
We're going to share at the end if that's okay.
Yeah. So what we did
I've got
was,
it, but I was going to share at the end.
Yeah. So what we did was we just we all actually just shared notes about what we'd done for church, because a lot of us are still homeless as far as finding our own church goes. But what we did was work on a meditation and drew our own response to the blessing that we had read. And it's just an opportunity to focus your mind on something, and taking the time to draw it, or make it or do something, meant that you're not looking at your screen, you're not looking at something else, you're actually focusing on Jesus. So it's a really nice way of making sure that we kept our eyes on Jesus on using this blessing for the week. So that's what we did.
So talk us through that, because we've got some of the art here. Who did this one?
This one's my drawing, and it's just a blessing called "Circle Me, Lord." You'll have to put up the actual. I can find it.
We'll tell everyone the blessing at the end.
Yeah, okay. So we just basically each drew our own response to it. So if you wanted to scroll through the pictures, that one's mine, and I just drew each of the circles that keeping us safe. This one's Karen's, and she drew a prayer and wrote her own prayer in a circle for the Lord circling her. And then the next one this is Janae's doing hers today, and I think Ronan's doing his as well. Just kept scrolling through.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're making their own circles of the Lord circling them and keeping them safe. And so I would just encourage each of us to all maybe draw our own response to the verse, and or whatever way you want to use clay or Play-Doh or whatever, do whatever you want, and just spend some time, because you can do it with your kids as well, and just come up with your own response, prayerful response, and some mindfulness time on this blessing, and then post them wherever Dan tells you to post them, so that everyone can share. And it's just a nice way of corporately doing something together, even though we are all in our own place.
Thanks so much, Suze. And I just think the stuff that's come out of that is really great. I think if you don't mind, we'll put some of it up on Facebook as well, because I think it's not only about us going on the journey and producing a piece of art ourselves. I might struggle with that in the painting sense, but it's also allowing other people's work to speak to us and making it like this corporate thing. So I found that really helpful, and really grateful for you coming on to share about it. So what we'll do in the coming weeks, as me and Suze were saying, is just encourage people, if you create something, if part of your rule is to practice a piece of art or do anything really, please, if you feel comfortable well. I know it's really hard, and I know we just talked about humility, but please share it, because I believe it will bless others as well. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Great, thanks so much, Suze. Good to see you.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'll see you face to face very soon. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Great to have you. Oh, it's been really good to have you all with us tonight. We've slightly overrun again, but not as much as we did last week. But just to say, part of us developing this rule of life, like we're up for helping you with that as a church, and we really want to go on this journey with you. So I know, one of the things that we've developed this week is daily reflections. So we've got these really nice reflections which I've adapted from a priest in the UK and an online resource, and Jan's done some work on them as well. And basically there's going to be a reading for every day. So that might be a really good starting place for your rule of life. Something you can do with the kids and something you can do with the whole family. And the other thing to say is that Easter's coming up, and we'd love to hang out with you over Easter online as much as we can. We'd also love to hear from you if you want to give us a ring or respond to any of the activities that have been suggested today. It'd be great to hear from you. But on Thursday night, we're going to have a gathering as we think about the Last Supper, and Renee's going to lead us through that and make a little video, which is coming in the next couple of days, to explain how we might get involved in that. And then we're going to celebrate together on Easter Sunday, and there'll be one or two other bits. So do stay in touch. We'd love to hear from you. There won't be a 4 and an 8 p.m. next Sunday because it's Easter, but we'll be back the week after to do a 4 and an 8 p.m. It's been really good to hear from you. Thanks for your comments. Please continue the conversation online below. And thank you and good night. I'm going to finish with this blessing that Sue's mentioned. Circle me, Lord. Keep protection near and danger afar. Circle me, Lord. Keep hope within. Keep doubt without. Circle me, Lord. Keep light near and darkness far. Circle me, Lord. Keep peace within and evil out. The blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen. Thank you so much. Good night.